The dinner had been my mother's idea, the way most things in our family were. She had spent 3 days cooking, not because she needed to. My aunt had offered to bring the green bean casserole, my cousin had volunteered for the rolls, but because cooking was how my mother showed that something mattered. The more food, the more it mattered. And this particular Saturday in October mattered a great deal, because my brother was home. Not just home from a work trip, home from Seattle, home from the life he had built there over the past 7 years as a financial compliance attorney at a firm whose name I had memorized the way you memorize things you're proud of without fully understanding them. I had set the table with the good plates, the ones that only came out at Thanksgiving and Christmas and whenever my mother decided that an ordinary weekend needed to feel like a milestone. My husband, who worked as a forensic accountant for a regional firm in Columbus, had offered to help, and I had handed him the cloth napkins without thinking much about it. He was folding them into neat rectangles when my brother walked in through the back door. I watched my mother's face do the thing it always did when she saw him, a kind of softening, like something that had been held tight for a long time finally releasing. She hugged him for a beat longer than she hugged me, but I had stopped counting those things years ago. Or I had tried to. My brother was 34. He was 2 years older than me, and he had always been the one who knew what he wanted. Even as a kid, he had a plan. He was going to law school. He was going to work in corporate finance. He was going to live in a city where things happened. And from everything we could see, he had done exactly that. He set his bag down and pulled our dad into a handshake that turned into a hug, and our dad laughed the way he only laughed around my brother, a little louder and a little easier than usual. My father had worked double shifts at a paper distribution company for 3 years to help cover my brother's law school tuition. It was not something he brought up. It was not something any of us brought up, but it sat in the room sometimes, quiet and understood, the way debts that are paid with love tend to sit. Dinner was loud in the good way. My mother had made pot roast and mashed potatoes and the kind of gravy that takes most of the morning. My brother talked about Seattle, traffic, the weather, a new apartment he was thinking of looking at closer to downtown. He was funny about it, the way he was funny about most things, self-deprecating and warm, and my father kept refilling his water glass without being asked. My husband sat next to me and ate and mostly listened. That was not unusual. He was a listener by nature and by training. He asked good questions when he asked them, and he had a way of being comfortable in a room without demanding anything from it. My family liked him, which had taken about 2 years and was not nothing. It was after the plates were cleared and my mother was bringing out the apple cake she had made from a recipe she'd had since 1987 that my husband leaned toward me slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice. He said my name the way he does when he needs me to pay attention without making it obvious that he needs me to pay attention. I turned just slightly. "The firm he mentioned," he said low. "Carver and Associates. I've seen that name before." I waited. "I don't think they do compliance work out of the Seattle office. Or I don't think they have a Seattle office at all." I looked at my brother, who was laughing at something my father had said. His shoulders were relaxed. His laugh was real. He looked like a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. "You're probably misremembering," I said. My husband nodded slowly. "Probably." But he didn't say anything else for the rest of the night, and I know him well enough to know that when he stops talking about something, it's because he's still thinking about it. I didn't sleep well that night. This is the thing about being handed a question you didn't ask for. It doesn't leave you. It just sits at the edge of everything, patient, waiting for a quiet moment to grow louder. I told myself my husband was wrong. He worked in forensic accounting, not in law, and he wasn't omniscient. Firm names blur together. He could have been thinking of a different firm, a different city, a different conversation entirely. My brother had been at this job for 4 years. He sent emails from a work address. He had talked about partners by name, about cases in the vaguest terms the way lawyers always do, about a difficult quarter and a strong one. He had stories, specific ones. That was what I kept coming back to. The stories were specific. the kind of specific that you don't manufacture, the kind that has texture and weight. But at 2 in the morning, I found myself at the kitchen table with my phone, and I looked up Carver and Associates. They had offices in Chicago, Denver, and Dallas. Not Seattle. I put my phone face down on the table and sat there for a while. I didn't say anything to anyone for 9 days. I want to be honest about that because it matters. There is a version of this story where I immediately went to my brother and said, "Look, something doesn't add up. Let's talk." But that is not what I did. What I did was carry it quietly, the way I had watched my brother carry things quietly for most of his life, and I tried to find an explanation that did not require me to do anything difficult. Maybe the website was outdated. Maybe he worked for a subsidiary, a satellite arrangement, something informal that didn't show up on the main page. Maybe I had misheard the name of the firm all these years and had only thought it was Carver and Associates. My husband did not bring it up again. This was deliberate, I knew. He had done what he felt he needed to do, which was tell me. What I did with it was mine to decide. On the 9th day, I called my brother. Not about any of it. I called to ask if he wanted to come down for Thanksgiving, whether he was flying or driving, whether he needed us to pick him up from the airport. Normal logistics, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, easy and warm, and right before I was about to hang up, I said his name. "Yeah," he said. "Are you okay?" There was a pause, briefer than a breath, longer than nothing. "Yeah," he said again. "Why?" "I don't know. You just seemed a little tired when you were here." "Long drive," he said. "Right." I let it go, but something in that pause had settled into me, and I could not settle it back out. I want to tell you about my brother, because I don't think you can understand what came next without understanding him. He was the kind of kid who read the instructions before starting anything. He made his bed every morning from the age of 8, not because anyone made him, but because it bothered him to leave it undone. He set goals the way other kids collected things, carefully, deliberately, with a clear sense of what each one was worth. When he told our parents in his junior year of high school that he was going to be a lawyer, it wasn't a dream, it was a schedule. He had already researched LSAT prep timelines. He had already looked at which undergraduate majors had the best law school placement rates. He was 17. My parents responded the way parents respond when a child hands them a blueprint instead of a wish. They built around it. They saved differently. They talked about him differently. My mother mentioned him at church, in the same breath she mentioned the weather, consistently, easily, like a fixed thing in the landscape of her life. He got into law school, not the top choice, but a solid one. In Columbus, close enough that he came home some weekends first year. My father worked those extra shifts without saying much about it, and my brother worked part-time and took out loans and did what he needed to do. He graduated. There were pictures. My mother framed 3 of them. And then he took a job in Seattle at a firm that did financial compliance work, and he built a life there, and we watched it from a distance and felt proud in the scattered, second-hand way that families feel proud of the member who got out and made something of themselves somewhere else. That was the story. I had believed it completely. The conversation happened on a Tuesday in November, 3 weeks after the dinner. Not because I planned it for a Tuesday, because my brother called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual, and something in his voice was different. Not wrong, exactly. Just thinner. Like a sound coming from a little farther away than it should. We talked for a few minutes, and then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. "Did Ryan say something to you after dinner?" I was quiet for a moment. "About what?" I said. Another pause, longer this time. "I saw him look something up on his phone," my brother said. "Right after we talked about the firm, I saw his face." I sat down. "He mentioned something small," I said. "Just that he wasn't sure about the office location." My brother didn't say anything. "I looked it up," I said. "After. Carver doesn't have a Seattle office." The silence on his end was the kind that has weight to it, the kind you can feel through a phone line. "No," he said finally, "they don't." I waited. "I haven't worked there in 3 years," he said. He said it the way you say something that has been waiting a long time to be said, not with relief, not with shame, but with a kind of exhausted flatness, like a door that has finally been allowed to close. I didn't say anything. I let him keep talking. What he told me came out slowly, in pieces, the way things come out when they've been held in for a long time and have calcified into something that resists sudden movement. He had worked at the firm. That part was true. He had worked there for almost 2 years after passing the bar, doing compliance review work that he described as fine, manageable, nothing that lit him up particularly, but something he had told himself would get better once he had more experience, more autonomy, more of whatever it was that was always supposed to come later. The job had ended. Not dramatically. A round of layoffs, he said, in a quarter when the firm pulled back. He was one of 12 people let go on the same day in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee. He had packed a box, said goodbye to a few colleagues he genuinely liked, and driven home to his apartment in something close to shock. He was 29. He had told no one. Not our parents, not me, not our aunt, who had sent him a congratulations card when he passed the bar with a $50 check and a note in her handwriting that said, "We always knew you would." He had sat with it for a week, he said, and then another week, and somewhere in those 2 weeks the window for telling people had closed, or at least it had felt that way. The story had already been set. The version of him that existed in our family's understanding of the world was a lawyer in Seattle, at a firm called Carver and Associates, and dismantling that felt like something he didn't know how to do without dismantling everything around it. So he hadn't. He had spent the first few months sending out applications while telling everyone he was still at the firm. He had gotten a job, a real one, contract work at first, then full-time, doing financial analysis for a mid-sized logistics company. Good work, he said. Work he actually understood and was good at, but not law. And not what he had told anyone he was doing. He had been doing it for 3 years. He paid rent. He paid his own bills. He was not in debt. He had even, quietly and without telling anyone, started paying our father back for the law school contribution. Not all at once, but monthly, routed through an account our father used for home repairs, in amounts small enough that our father had apparently assumed it was interest accumulating somewhere he'd forgotten about. I did not know what to say about that last part. I still don't entirely. "I know what it looks like," my brother said. "I'm not sure you do," I said, and I didn't mean it harshly. I meant that I wasn't sure any of us could see it clearly yet. "I should have told you," he said. "I should have told all of you a long time ago." "Yes," I said, "you should have." We were quiet for a moment. "Are you angry?" he said. I thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm sad that you carried it by yourself for 3 years. I'm sad that you thought you couldn't tell us. I'm sad about what that must have been like." He didn't say anything. "But I also need you to talk to Mom and Dad," I said, "not because you owe them a confession, because they love you and they've been operating on a version of your life that isn't real and they deserve to know you." He said he knew. He said he'd been trying to figure out how. I said I would be there when he did, if he wanted me to be. The conversation with our parents happened the weekend before Thanksgiving. My brother drove down from Seattle. He sat at the same kitchen table where my mother had served coffee every morning of his childhood, and he told them. I will not describe it in full because some things belong to the people who were in the room and should not be borrowed for anyone else's understanding. But I will tell you a few things. My father did not say much for the first few minutes after my brother finished. He sat with his hands around his coffee mug, and his face was doing something I had not seen it do before, a kind of interior reckoning, working through something without showing all of it. Then he said, "Are you okay?" Not, how could you? Not, do you know what I sacrificed? Not, why didn't you tell us? Just, are you okay? My brother's voice broke on the answer, which was the first time I had heard it break in as long as I could remember. My mother cried. She cried in the way she cries when she is not trying to manage her crying, which is rare and which means she is feeling something too big to contain. She reached across the table and took my brother's hand, and she held it, and she said something to him that I could not quite hear from where I was sitting near the window. Later she told me what she had said. She had said, "I wish you had told me sooner, not because I would have been angry. Because you should not have had to carry that alone." It was not a seamless conversation. There were hard parts. My father had questions about the money, about the firm, about what the plan was going forward, and those questions had some edge to them in the way that honest questions sometimes do when someone is sitting with a disappointment they're trying to understand. My brother answered them. He didn't deflect or get defensive. He had clearly prepared himself to be asked the things that were difficult to answer, and he answered them. The repayments surprised my father. When my brother explained that the deposits my father had been seeing for the last 14 months were intentional, my father set down his mug and looked at my brother for a long moment. "You could have just told me," my father said. "I know," my brother said. "You didn't have to do it that way." "I know, but I needed to." I think I understood that, even if it was not the most direct path. There are things people do not because they're the most logical thing to do, but because they need to do something that costs them something. It was the only way my brother knew, at that point, to begin. Thanksgiving was quieter than usual. Not in a bad way. More like the quiet of a room after something has been moved, when the air settles back into the space left behind. We ate my mother's food and watched football, and my brother sat on the couch next to my father the way he used to sit there when he was a teenager. And at some point, my father's hand moved to my brother's shoulder and stayed there for a while. Nobody made a speech. Nobody summarized anything. We just sat there together and ate too much and let the afternoon move at whatever pace it wanted to move. My husband helped me with the dishes afterward, and I handed him a glass to dry without saying anything, and he took it without saying anything, and for a while we just worked like that, side by side. "You okay?" he said eventually. "Yeah," I said. And then I said, "Thank you for saying something." "I wasn't sure I should," he said. "I know," I said, "but you were right." He nodded once and handed me back a bowl I'd missed a spot on, which was such a normal and specific thing to do that I almost laughed. I have thought about this a lot since then, not obsessively, but the way you think about something that reshapes a small part of how you see the world. My brother was not a bad person. He was not even a dishonest person, not at his core. He was a person who made a decision in a moment of fear and then found himself living inside the consequences of that decision for longer and longer. And at each point where he might have gotten out, the cost felt higher than it had the time before. I understand that. I think most people do if they're honest. What I keep coming back to is my father's question, not the hard ones, not the ones about money and logistics and what comes next. The first one. Are you okay? That is the thing my brother needed to hear, I think, not at the kitchen table last November. Years before that, he needed to know that the question would come before the accounting did, that he was a person before he was a plan. I don't know if we failed him there, or if he failed himself, or if it was one of those things that is both and neither, and mostly just the ordinary difficulty of families who love each other imperfectly, which is to say, all families. He is doing well now. He is still in Seattle, still at the logistics company, and I think he is genuinely happy in a way he was not when he was performing a version of himself for the people who loved him. We talk more. Not about anything in particular. Just talk. My parents adjusted. It took a few months. There was some silence that had to be worked through, some recalibrating of the image they carried. But they did it, because that is what people who love each other do when they decide that the person matters more than the story about the person. And my mother's framed photos are still up. She didn't take them down. I noticed it the last time I was home, and I thought about saying something and then I decided I didn't need to. She knows who is in those pictures. She knows who he is now. And she kept them anyway, which is not denial. It is just love, doing the only thing it knows how to do, which is to hold on to what was real even when the story around it has changed. I still think about the way my father's hands looked wrapped around that coffee mug. Still, not moving, just holding something warm while he worked through what he'd just heard. He could have made it about himself. He had every reason to. He had worked extra shifts for 3 years. He had quietly built his savings around a version of his son's future that turned out not to be real. And when he finally found out, the first thing he asked was not "How could you?" or "Do you know what this cost me?" He asked if his son was okay. That is the part I keep returning to, because I think that question, the one my father asked before any other, was not accidental. It came from somewhere that had been built over a long time, a decision repeated quietly across years to keep the person at the center of things rather than the story about the person. My brother made choices I don't fully understand even now. He let a version of himself calcify inside our family's understanding of the world, and he lived inside that version for years rather than face the moment of rupture that telling the truth would have required. I don't think he was dishonest at his core. I think he was afraid, which is a different thing, though it can produce some of the same damage. What I've come to believe is that the fear didn't come from nowhere. It came from how completely he had attached his worth to a plan, from how early he had decided that a specific outcome, law school, a firm, a title, was the only version of himself that would hold up. And when that version collapsed, he couldn't find a way back to the simpler question of who he actually was without it. That is something I recognize, not in myself exactly, but in the way families work. We build images of the people we love, and we invest in those images, and sometimes the people inside them feel the weight of that investment so heavily that they can't admit when the image has stopped being true. My brother carried that weight alone for 3 years because he had not yet learned, or had not yet trusted, that the people who loved him were capable of separating him from his resume. It took my husband's quiet observation, and 9 days of my own avoidance, and a Tuesday phone call, and a hard conversation at a kitchen table to get us all to the point where we could finally see each other clearly. That is a long route. It cost something, but I think what came out the other side of it was more honest than what we had before. My brother is doing well. He is doing work that actually fits him. He is paying his own way and, quietly, making things right with our father in the only way he knew how. That is not nothing. That took something real, a willingness to finally be seen as he was, not as he was supposed to be, and to keep going anyway. I think that is what integrity actually looks like in practice. Not the absence of failure, not a clean record, but the decision, eventually, to stop protecting the false version and let the real one stand up and be counted, even when it costs you. My mother's photos are still on the wall. I asked her about it once, obliquely, and she looked at me like the question barely made sense to her. "Of course they're still up," she said. "He's still my son.